The state of Iowa is the first state in the United States to get rid of a stupid COVID-era eviction rule that forced landlords to give 30 days notice before evictions. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting article for you today. It's coming out of the state of Iowa, and it has to do with COVID-era eviction protections for tenants, okay? COVID, the whole pandemic nonsense, it was an absolute nightmare. I started my channel during the pandemic because of all of the stupid eviction moratoriums, the nonsense with rental assistance, the implementation of rent controls all over the place. Okay, they all of a sudden were attacking landlords as though the whole mess was our fault. Like we suddenly were a charity that had to provide free housing to whoever wanted to stay. And I told you back then, landlords are going bankrupt because of these rules, okay? And I still believe that, yes, that was one of the worst things to ever happen to landlords in the entire country. And my belief was at the time that this is a push towards socialism, this is a push towards nationwide rent control, and we absolutely have to stop it. So to this day, most of the rules had already been tossed out, but there was a eviction protection, a notice requirement that almost all states were still requiring from landlords. And Iowa was the first state to get rid of this stupid 30-day notice rule, okay? The Iowa State Supreme Court ruled that, hey, we're not gonna do this anymore. And I agree with that. I hope that all the other states follow suit and decide, hey, you know what, this is dumb. Let's get back to normal, 100% back to the way things should be. Does it suck for tenants? No, if you pay your rent, it's not gonna suck, okay? I've mentioned this many times before about lots of these different rules. You know what? You only fall under this strict procedure if you're not doing things right. So do things right, pay your rent, pay it on time, and you won't fall victim to all of this nonsense, okay? So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. So I'm just curious about, did you suffer any during the COVID-19 pandemic eviction moratoriums? Obviously, all the landlords I know who had, we all suffered some losses. None of us got through unscathed, but I'm just curious and I want to see some comments in the comments section about what you experienced. Now, I know I've asked this question before. It's been a little while, but this is a good time to bring this topic back up. We should keep it fresh in our minds. Remind yourself why we never want to see this sort of nonsense happen again. Anyway, let me get into the article and tell you what it says. This article is coming from the Des Moines Register.com, and it says, Iowa Supreme Court, first in the U.S. to rule the COVID-era 30-day eviction notice requirement expired. Let's get into it. The Iowa Supreme Court says landlords no longer have to provide tenants 30 days notice before evictions, splitting with courts in other states that have held the pandemic-era federal rule is still in effect. The requirement was part of the Federal CARES Act passed in March of 2020 during the early days of the COVID-19 outbreak when millions of people were temporarily out of work and unable to afford their rent. To prevent mass homelessness, Congress barred landlords nationwide for 3 months from filing eviction claims or charging late rent penalties. Yeah, so they thought that mass homelessness was going to occur. Well, simply put, they would have been themselves the cause of the mass homelessness because they told everybody to stay home. They shut businesses down. They created the problem, and then what's their solution? To create more problems by putting in an eviction moratorium and then putting in this nonsense about notice. And they try all these stupid things, and the problems they create are bigger than the problems they were trying to fight. And that's what we learned from the whole pandemic. It's like, hey, the cure, the solution to COVID, right, is actually worse than COVID itself was. Ha! Crazy how that works out. Anyway, let me continue. The law also required that after the 3-month moratorium, landlords give tenants 30 days notice of evictions. Unlike the moratorium, the law did not specify an end date for the requirement. But the Iowa Supreme Court unanimously ruled January 24th that the notice stipulation was temporary and no longer is in effect. The court reversed 2 cases where district judges had rejected eviction proceedings for insufficient notice, clearing the path for other landlords statewide to commence evictions with as little as 3 days' notice, as permitted by Iowa law. Yeah, okay. The notice requirements up to the individual location, in my opinion, and following state law. Period. Okay? That COVID stuff is over. It is 2025 now. Now we're 5 years beyond all of that. Of course, we won't forget. You know, that my daughter, if she ever becomes a landlord, she won't have the memory, but I will remind her. I will tell her what exactly happened, why it was bad, and, you know, show her, you know, all of the nonsense from the videos that I created. I hope she gets to see all of it and understands it one day, because, you know what, it is going to be hard for her. She was born in 2019, and she's not going to remember all of the nonsense that we all went through, okay? But, you know, it's a social experiment to me, everything that happened. We got to find out the truth behind, you know, what causes inflation, what causes unemployment, what happens when the government gives away free money. Oh, we saw just ridiculous nonsense, and all of the things that those of us who are more conservative, who are more fiscally conservative, the things that we have been preaching for years, we saw all of them happen, and then we saw, you know, just the whole negative effects of what would happen if these policies were implemented permanently. And thank goodness that didn't happen. Attorney Mark Weinhardt, who represented plaintiff the retreat on 6th Apartment Complex in Cedar Rapids, said in a statement that the court correctly found the CARES Act was a temporary measure in response to a temporary crisis. This decision puts Iowa landlord-tenant issues back where they have been for over a century, in the realm of state law, he said. That said, whenever possible, our client works directly with residents facing economic challenges to avoid evictions in the first place. Attorneys with the Fredrickson and Byron law firm, which filed a brief in the case on behalf of a number of landlord organizations, posted an article on the firm's website declaring that this decisive order from the Iowa Supreme Court brings an end to years of confusion and uncertainty in the eviction process in Iowa. And I hope that other states, they take notice and that they make similar rulings, okay? Because that nonsense it's stupid. We have our state laws we put in place for a certain reason, and punishing landlords indefinitely for a very temporary situation such as the pandemic, it's dumb. I think that them putting that rule in place during the pandemic was dumb in the first place, but even their argument is that the whole thing was supposed to be temporary, yet here we are 5 years later, and these rules are still in place. Now, obviously, places like California and New York, they're like, no, we're going to leave this rule in place forever. And then they probably codified that crap in state law. Well, that's why I tell you, don't invest in those sort of places. Don't put your investment money into housing in those sort of places, because it will bite you in the butt, okay? It will bite you in the butt. You'll be sitting there, especially if you're a small mom and pop, especially if you own one house and all of a sudden you can't get a tenant out of there because they're saying you didn't give them sufficient notice. Give me a break. Anyway, tell me what you think of this whole situation in the comment section down below. I know that states like New York already have extremely long notice requirements for evictions. So, you know, let me know what you think of this. You know, obviously, it won't make much of a difference in places like New York and California if they already have extremely long eviction requirements. So, yeah, comment section down below.